This is Heidi Wall-Giesbrecht of Encouragement Along the Journey.
Well, welcome here, everybody. I'm glad to be doing this Substack Live with John Longhurst. And just a quick little professional introduction of John. He is a longtime religion reporter. He's interviewed people from many different backgrounds, traditions, and walks of life. Along the way, he has undoubtedly witnessed societal change. He's explored questions of meaning and belief and gathered stories that reveal something about what it means to be human. And so in this conversation, we are just going to explore what a lifetime of listening can teach us about people, purpose, friendship, aging, curiosity, and just the questions that shape our life. So we are not planning a structure. We're planning to just go where we feel like we'd like to go. But before we begin, I actually want to tell a little story. And John, you might remember this story. You probably will. I have known of John for many years. He has been a longtime reporter for the Winnipeg Free Press, where I actually did my undergrad studies. And so I knew who he was, and I went to an event in Winnipeg several years ago, and he was the reporter on premises, just kind of following the event. And the opportunity was there for people to have a chat with him and decide whether they wanted their story to be featured. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but on my way by, I at least just said hello, and a conversation started. And in that process, we discovered that both of us had actually attended the same college. And when he gave his years, it was the same years that my brother had attended. And I remember saying, "Oh, you might know my brother." And I said my brother's name, and there was like no recognition on your part. And I was like, "Oh, that's really strange." Because as I recall, my brother was he was a pretty big personality, and a lot of people knew him. And so suddenly it dawned on me, wait a minute, a lot of people only knew him by his nickname. And so I remember mentioning his nickname, and I remember your response because it was something like, "What? What? That's your brother?" And it was this delightful moment where we had this connection of someone who was actually really important to both of us being this common person. And that evening, when I got back to where I was staying, you sent me some pictures of my brother that I'd never seen before.
Hmm.
And it was just this really special moment where I was like, wow, like a deep connection with someone who actually was very formative in my own life. And so in my mind, John, you have become like the representation of my brother who passed
Mhm.
away when I was 16. And recently, I know we've had some conversations, and one of the things I said to you was, when I feel like calling my brother, I kind of think of you now.
Hmm.
So you might become the person I call when I want to talk to my brother. So it's uh, it's been a really lovely connection. So I am absolutely delighted that you are willing to be here today and be part of this conversation. And welcome. I know
Thank you.
you're new to Substack, and this is your first live. So I know I've been kind of pestering you to get on Substack for a while because I think you've got a lot of wisdom and things worth sharing that people will really appreciate and connect deeply with. So yeah, welcome. And maybe you just tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much, Heidi. Yes, and her brother's nickname was Ziffel, by the way, because back in the 60s when I was young, there was a show called Green Acres, and there was a pig on the show called Arnold. And Arnold Ziffel he belonged to the Ziffels, Arnold Ziffel. Then he became Ziffel Ziff, was how so I didn't know his first name much, because we called him Ziff.
My favorite.
Anyway, yes, I've been a reporter and communicator my whole career. I've been writing about religion for the Winnipeg Free Press since 2003 as a faith page columnist. And from 2019 until just last month, I was the religion reporter at the newspaper. People who are tuning in might be interested in therapy. And in therapy, people ask questions. Well, I'm a professional questioner. My job as a reporter is to ask questions. And that's what I've done for many, many years now. Tell me about why did you? Where did that come from? How did you get that idea? What was the result? These are the kinds of things that are my stock and trade. That's what I do. I ask questions, and that's something I like doing. And then getting out of the way and letting people tell me their stories. And I like
Mm.
helping people tell their stories. Everyone has a story of some kind, and I have
Yes.
the privilege of being able to help them tell that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and when you shared your bio with me, the thing that caught my attention, I'm like, I'm gonna just ask this right off the bat, was you received the Order of Canada, and I just find that fascinating. And we're gonna have people listening to this who are from Canada, but there will also be people from around the world. So, can you tell me a little bit about what is the Order of Canada? How does one receive it? Is it kind of like showing up in front of the queen to be knighted? I don't know, or the king at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Mm.
yes. The Order of Canada is the highest civilian honor that Canadians can receive. For American listeners, it's equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Freedom. But the way you get it
Mm.
here in Canada is that someone nominates you, and I don't know who nominated me. And then you are
Mm.
reviewed by a committee and you receive the award from the Governor General, who is the King's representative in Canada.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. What a wonderful acknowledgement of the work that you've done. And I know part of the acknowledgement was, oh, you had written it out for me. It was about honoring and encouraging interaction and mutual respect between faith communities across Canada. And I love that. It just feels so inclusive and expansive.
Yes, that's true. It was for my interfaith reporting and writing, and for my goal of trying to reduce hate between people from
Mm,
different religions in this country.
oh my goodness. Yeah, so needed. Not not just in our historical past, but in our current existence. Yeah. I How did you get into religion reporting? Like, was that a did you decide to do that? Was it, "Hey, I need a job. This is available"? Like, how did it happen?
I've always been interested in the media, and I spent most of my career as a communicator in the nonprofit world, especially in the international relief and development world, which was a great career because I got to travel the world, meet interesting people, see and do interesting things, and then tell the stories about those people. But I realized early on in my career that if you just wrote for religious publications, you were reaching a very narrow audience. The public in general was not being reached with the stories of how, in this case, church organizations were living out their faith by responding to needs in the developing world. And so I began to interact more and more with the general media. And for anyone who's younger on this call and looks at the mainstream media today, they won't necessarily think much of it because it's greatly diminished. But back in the 1980s and
Mm,
90s and early 2000s, the mainstream media was a thing. Everybody got a newspaper or listened to the news or watched the TV news. It was the
mm,
best way to reach millions and millions and millions of people. So I began engaging with the media with messages about nonprofit and international development work, but also about religion and encouraging them to do a better job of reporting about religion in Canada. In
mm,
1998, I organized Canada's first Faith and Media Conference. It was at Carleton
mm,
University School of Journalism in Ottawa. It was sponsored by a
mm,
wide array of faith groups and media, and and we just tried to put it on the agenda to say this is something important that should not be overlooked or ignored. Today, however, the Winnipeg Free Press is the only newspaper in Canada with a religion beat, and I
mm,
was, for a time, the only religion reporter in Canada. I've been replaced. There is someone else doing it at the paper
mm.
now. But yes, the religion beat is pretty much gone in this country. It's greatly diminished in the United States as well, even though they still have
Mm,
major newspapers with religion beats. But as the media has struggled financially, they've cut things they call the
mm,
soft beats, restaurant reviews, movie reviews, chess,
mm,
wine, different things they used to always carry, and religion was considered soft as well, and so they let those go in an effort to survive. But that's too
mm.
bad because religion, love it or hate it, is still a force in the world and still impacts a
Oh,
lot of the things that happened in society, politics, culture, economics, business, you name it. There's always
yeah.
often a religion angle, some reason why what is happening because of what people believe, or and beyond that, it's just a matter of people looking for meaning and purpose in life, however they choose to
Yeah.
find it. And that can be a
Yeah.
spiritual quest as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because as you're talking, I find myself thinking, do we define religion too narrowly? Because really, when you said, religion is about what people believe. And I think often people have a picture of religion as this thing that you do and these rules that you follow and this place that you go rather than, I mean, essentially what I hear in that is everyone has religion because religion is just about the things that we believe deeply and hold deeply. So I wonder, like, is it broader than we see it?
Oh, absolutely. Religion is the structure or the cup or the form we put it in. How we've
Yeah.
come to define whatever this spiritual quest is. And over
Mhm.
time, organized religion has become hyper organized
Mhm.
and then siloed in denominations and belief groups and doctrines and dogmas and all sorts of things.
Mhm.
Increasingly, Canadians and also Americans and obviously people in other countries as well are letting loose, letting go of that, of the organized
Mhm.
religion part. Here in Canada, 36% of Canadians say they don't identify with any religion. It's expected to be as high as 40% by this next census this year. But that doesn't mean they're atheists. The atheists, people who identify as atheists in Canada, are a very, very tiny group. Most people say they believe in God or a higher power or something bigger than themselves, but they don't put it in the box we
Mhm.
call organized religion. They would not identify
Right.
as Lutheran or United Church or Mennonite or Catholic or Baha'i or anything. They would simply say, I think there's a mystery, there's something bigger, but it doesn't
Right.
happen on Sunday mornings for me. And
Mm.
that's
Right.
a new reality because 50, 60, 70 years ago, there were more Canadians used to go to church in this country than Americans. We were a very
Mm.
religious country, and organized religion
Mhm.
was a powerful force in Canada,
Yeah.
but it's not the same today at all.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder, are we in the stories that we tell, because you've talked about stories and everyone has a story to share. Are we still asking a lot of the same questions that we've always asked? Are we still grappling with some similar themes, or has that changed over time? What is your observation on that front?
Well, if you talk to people who do spiritual care in hospitals, they'll tell you that everybody is challenged or thinks about the idea of meaning and purpose. Did my life have meaning?
Mm,
Did I have a purpose? Did I make a difference? And those aren't necessarily religious questions, but they can be spiritual questions,
right.
and those are the kinds of things that I think people continue to think about and
Yeah.
wonder about. That's I mean, it keeps therapists busy, right? As people come to talk and ask about their lives
Yeah.
and the lives they're leading and whether it makes a difference or why should I continue? And so there's something deeper in people. It evidences itself in very practical ways. Do you volunteer at a food bank? Do
Mhm.
you are you a climate change activist because you believe the earth
Yeah.
is sacred? All sorts of ways, right? But deep inside, people often have those deeper questions. What I do in my reporting and my writing is to look for where those feelings or those beliefs interact with society at large. I'm not an
Mm,
introspective reporter. I'm not yeah, I'm not plumbing the depths of someone's inner spirituality. I want to know, well, how does it make a difference? Where does it evidence itself?
mm,
How do you put it into practice in your life or in your church or your faith group or whatever?
yeah.
How does what you believe evidence somehow? Because that's where we meet it and see it, right? That's where it's
Yeah.
obvious to us all.
There any favorite story that comes to mind along those lines of, something that someone shared with you about how they are interacting with those around them in a meaningful way?
Oh, there's so many
You have so
stories
many I know, you have so many
like
stories to
that.
choose from, so
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's really hard to put my finger on. I've been privileged to meet so many different people who have had so many amazing
Mhm.
stories over my gosh, I've written, 1,000 columns and 1,000 stories, and I just can't possibly think of one. What for me as a reporter, what's the most amazing thing is when people invite you in and give you
Mm.
permission to tell their stories. It's an amazing thing, and it's also a very vulnerable thing, as you probably know, to put yourself out there and say, I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to
Mhm.
trust you to tell it well and tell it truthfully and tell it in a way that makes me, look good or positive or
Yeah.
balanced or whatever. That's an awesome responsibility. Uh, I know that today people have access to social media and they can write anything they want, anytime they want, however they want. But when you're a journalist, it's a different thing altogether. You're really painstakingly working at the details, the accuracy,
Yeah.
checking, double checking. And then when you follow your story, someone else reads it and checks it. And then a third person will read it and check it. So by the time it gets to you in your paper or on the news, however you get your news, it's been through at least 3 checks to make
Mm.
sure that
Right.
there's nothing in there that is inaccurate. And that's why media still plays such an important role. I realize that social media is a powerful force, but journalists really do work at the details, and we hate to get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, we change it. We go
Yeah.
back and we make changes to our stories.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, having been on the interviewee end of things, both with you and also in our local community with cable news. It's really scary to put your story out there because you are often sharing something really, really vulnerable. And the thought that, does this person have integrity? Are they going to respect the things that I say, but please don't say this, or please don't share my name, or please don't, whatever the please don't that kind of holds us back. Will this person honor that? And how will that story look? Like, I don't necessarily want to be painted as a saint, that's not it, but I want my story to be told in a way that actually honors it fully. And I remember my very first interview was actually a radio interview, and then that was picked up by our local TV station, and then I was on TV after that, and it was terrifying because it was a deeply personal experience, and I had something in mind that had very much to do with equity, fairness in the community, and the story, though, could very easily be sensationalized and be made all about something else, and that was my fear was, are they gonna jump on this and go, "Ooh, this is an easy leader that we can turn into, something that gets people all stirred up," and they didn't. They were very, very gracious and understanding, and I felt, deeply respected in the process, and I know, that interview with you, that was a scary one too, because that one I'd say was even more personal, and just knowing that I was entrusting this story to you, and I wasn't sure how it was gonna go, and again, you were so great at asking questions and even writing it all up and sending it to us ahead of time and saying, "Hey, here's what I've got. Is there anything that you want me to change? Anything that you'd like to see different?" And it felt very collaborative and very respectful, and so I really appreciated that about your interview, just
Mm.
the way that you held that balance so well. And I imagine that's something that is probably part who you are and personality. And hi, Chris. I see Chris has just joined. And partly what you've learned along the way. Um,
Well, I mean, like I said, it's an awesome responsibility. Most of the people I interview will never be in the media except for that one time that I interview
mm,
them. And that one time is now going to set the tone for the rest of their lives. It used to be when it was in the newspaper and there wasn't an internet, and there was a time before the internet, and it wasn't that long ago, that it
right.
was, today's paper would be replaced by tomorrow's and then the next day and so on. And then it would be gone, and no one would ever remember it again. But now it's more or less permanent online and it can be
Yeah.
found by anyone. anytime by Googling your name. And then if that article
Yeah.
comes up and it's wrong, then that becomes sort of the record, and you want to be careful that that's not the case. What I will say though too is that I probably saved people a lot of grief over my career too. They say things to me that maybe they drop their guard, maybe they just get comfortable, maybe
Mm,
they say things that they probably shouldn't, and I just think, no, I'm not going to report that. I'm just going to
mm,
let that go because that's not going to look good on them, and it's unnecessary. I don't need any gotchas or anything like that. So yeah,
mm,
I probably saved people a lot of grief over my career
mm.
as much as having made an occasional error, which I've had to correct. So yes, it's an awesome thing, and I've appreciated doing it. And it's scary for me to be interviewed by you.
I remember when I first approached you about the possibility of doing a conversation, and I think I actually asked if you'd be willing to share your personal story, and you were like, I don't know. So this is like a little, teaser. We'll step into this
Hmm,
and we'll see how it goes, how it feels, and then I'll be like, "Hey, John, you want to share your personal story?" We'll go there another time.
maybe another time. The journalistic character is someone who's an observer and not a
Mhm.
participant, and I've
Mhm.
adopted that over well, that was probably who I was as a personality
Yeah.
anyway, but I've certainly adopted it
Yeah.
over time that I'm here to observe, I'm not here to
Yeah.
participate. I'm here to ask questions, I'm not here to give answers, and that's really been
Yeah.
my journalistic persona as well in my column writing. That I don't in my columns, I don't pretend to have answers because I'm not a theologian. I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm a
Mhm.
dabbler in, inch deep and a mile wide and all sorts of topics. But I can ask questions. I can put
Yeah.
things out there and invite people to ask, why is it that way? Or why do they think that way? Or,
Mhm.
I'd never thought of that before. And that's sort
Mhm.
of the approach I take, which is just to invite
Mhm.
people to speculate. I grew up in a religious tradition where questioning was not permitted, doubt was not allowed,
Mhm.
where there was only certainty in life. It was an evangelical tradition. And it didn't fit me then. And I understand better now why it didn't fit me. And now I invite people who might still be caught in some of those ways to ask questions. Meet someone
Mhm.
who's Baha'i, meet someone who's Muslim, meet a Hindu, and listen
Yeah.
to their story and ask yourself, really? They're not they don't they seem like nice people. They love their kids and go to
Exactly.
work and plant gardens and feed the hungry, and they're just like me. Isn't that something? And
Mhm.
that's not
Mhm.
the impression some of us got growing up in
Yeah.
very severe and strict Christian religious households where we were the only ones with the truth and everybody else had to be like us. And so meeting people who aren't like us and saying, wow, they're not so different after all. That's sort of what I hope
Yeah.
to do through my writing and help people broaden their view of their neighbors, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's what I've loved about your columns is just the insight into so many different people. And I think we often have much more in common than we realize if we just give ourselves a chance to be open to hearing about the other. And I love how you described what you do because as I was listening, I'm like, yep, and this is where you and I overlap in what we do. Because that's what I do. I ask questions. I'm not an expert. I don't have the answers. I do love inviting people into conversation and sometimes just asking a question. My favorite thing when I'm in a counseling session and I ask something and the person sits back and goes, huh, that's a really good question. And I'm like,
Mhm,
yes, I
mhm.
love it because yeah, I like asking questions that allow people to think about things and maybe discover something new that could actually be helpful. And yeah, I don't know if
And
you can
it's
see the comments, but
mm.
Chris just mentioned that the number one cause of death since recorded history is religious wars. Oh,
Well, that is certainly a contributor. I don't know if it's the number one, but yes, religion has contributed to a lot of the violence and sadness and
yeah.
problems in this world. That is certainly true. And I'm not an expert. I'm not historian or a scholar in these things, but but the one the one thing that is common to almost every religion is a version of what Christians call the golden rule, right? And the golden
Mm,
rule is treat others the way
mm,
you want to be treated. And
yeah,
every major religion has some version of that. Unfortunately, most religions have had periods of time when they didn't live according
yeah,
to that at all. But that's a common basis for all of us just to say, okay, I'd like you to treat me the way I'd like to be treated and vice versa, and
mm,
I'll treat you that way.
mhm,
Can't we all
mhm,
get along? And I wish that
mm,
would be better understood in so many ways.
yeah,
Unfortunately, we live at a time now, especially when we see what's happening in the United States, of extreme polarization, where a certain kind of Christianity is being elevated above all the other Christianities and all the other religions in that
yeah,
country. And it's really a very divisive kind of thing. And of course, what happens in the United States spills over into Canada one way or the other,
yeah,
and we're inundated with those things. So my columns, I suppose, are just a gentle way of pushing back and saying, "What do you think?" Asking people to
yeah,
ask themselves if that's the way they want to be or if that's the way we should be.
yeah, yeah. Continuing to be curious, right? And open to learning from others and
Well, this is when I get it. Every now and then I get to speak to aspiring journalists, young journalists, people studying journalism, and I often tell them that you can be taught how to do journalism. You can be taught how to write a story. But what you can't be taught is how to be curious. You either are or you aren't. And
mm,
if you're not curious, you'll be a good journalist. You'll be okay. But if you're curious, you'll be a great journalist because you'll go through life asking yourself always, why did he or she say that? What did they mean when they said that? Why did that happen? You'll always be wanting to know. And if you have that mindset, there's stories everywhere because you're always looking for
mhm,
them. But if you're not looking for them, then, you'll go through life more or less sleepily. So
yeah,
I'm always asking the questions, why?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, curiosity is something that I talk a lot about with my clients in my own life as well. And I think back to like who I was as a 7-year-old, and I think there was an element of curiosity. It I don't think like you, I grew up in a community where questions were not welcome. So I don't think that curiosity was nurtured. And so, there was a big season of growth in my own life of learning to lean more into that curiosity. And I think some people naturally are incredibly curious, and they're often maybe the ones who are considered disruptive as children, right? Because they don't just take yes or no for an answer, they want to understand it and they ask questions that you're like, why are you asking these questions? I mean, I have one of these kids myself who at age 3 asked me a question that I had no answer for. And I remember going to talk to a friend and he was like, "Who asked you this question?" And I'm like, "My
Mm,
3-year-old." And he's like,
mm.
"Wow, that's a big question." But I wonder with curiosity, like, do you think curiosity is something that we can grow? Because you said journalists who are curious are going to be great journalists. Journalists who are not will be fine.
Yeah, curiosity, that's an interesting question. I think you can learn to do it. You probably know the singer-songwriter Steve Bell.
Mhm.
You know him? He's a
Yep.
wonderful songwriter, and he has said in the past when people ask him, "Steve, where do you get your songs from?" He says, "My songs aren't inside me." He said, "They're all around me. I just have my antenna
Mm.
up, and so I find them." And
Yep.
that's the same with curiosity. If you put your antenna up, you're gonna run
Yep.
into these things all the time. That means reading widely, not just sticking to a certain siloed kind of thought that reinforces everything you already knew, but
Mhm.
but but listening to other people who aren't like you, people who might
Yeah.
have different beliefs, come from different countries, different religions, different ways of seeing the world, and just paying attention and asking yourself,
Mhm.
how does that compare to what I think? Or where did that
Mhm.
idea come from? Or how can I learn something about that I didn't know
Yeah.
before? So it's a posture. It can be learned, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some people have it innately too. Yes. And maybe
Yes,
those people end up as
absolutely.
journalists. I don't know.
Maybe, yes. Or as
Or
therapists.
therapists.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you touched a little on kind of what's happening in the world right now. And yeah, I wonder about your observations over time because you've gotten to hear deep parts of people's stories. Do you think there has been a shift? Or do you think a lot of what we're dealing with now is something that we've actually been dealing with all along?
No, there has been a shift. So
Okay.
when you and I were young, when I was young especially, the church had authorities. Religion had authority. We understood authority. Prime ministers, politicians, business leaders, clergy, right? There was a strong sense of authority. That sense is gone now. We don't have the same sense that there are authority figures who must be innately trusted. Part of that was broken for
Mm,
us in the religious world by the clergy sex scandals that became
yeah,
started to begin to be revealed in the early 2000s, especially in the Roman
yeah,
Catholic Church, but not exclusively. Lots of evangelicals and other denominations have been caught up in this too, where people lost faith in authority figures, right? Um,
yeah.
and it extends to all sorts of other authority figures too. So, no, there has been a shift. We're living in a time of uncertainty. We don't know exactly where authority is supposed to be found. And that includes and I can only speak as a Christian because that's the tradition I'm in, that includes the scriptures. I grew up with the sense that the Bible was the literal, spoken, shared word of God, right? To be taken literally in everything. And now I don't believe that way, and neither do many others. But if it's not there, then where is it? Where is that thing that where do we locate God in a different way? So people are searching, they're wondering, they're finding. They're finding it in nature, they're finding it in community, they're finding it in supper clubs, they're
Mm,
finding it in service, they're finding it in all sorts of different ways that were not the ways that we were told that's where you find it on Sundays in church
yeah.
or temple or mosque or wherever. So it's a different world, and so clergy are navigating it, denominational leaders are navigating it, everyone's navigating it and trying to figure out where the ground is firm. And maybe the ground
Yeah.
never was firm. Maybe we were always
Huh.
deluded into thinking it was, but now
Mm,
we know it isn't. And so we speak into and we live into that kind of world now and try to
mhm.
see where we end up. I think we just have to hold hands and stick together. Everything I
Yeah,
needed to know in life, I learned in kindergarten, Robert Fulghum, right? That book,
right.
like hold hands and stay together and have milk and cookies at 3 in the afternoon and take naps.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated, but it is scary. Scary for all of us. Hey, I'm old enough that I remember duck and cover, right? Put your hands, get under
Mm,
your desk because it's nuclear war. It's
oh,
not like this is such a unique and special time. Our parents went through World War II.
yeah,
In your Mennonite family, perhaps relatives who escaped from
yeah.
Russia through Germany escaped terrible, terrible times, right? I mean, it's not like this is a unique, special time, but this is the time we have, and we're
Mhm,
trying to figure out what what this world is like now.
mhm. Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, I follow a number of journalists that I'm sure you follow as well, who are writing daily about kind of what's happening and holding hope and kind of pointing out opportunities for we actually have an opportunity here to bring change about for something better. And when you said, yeah, we grew up in a time where authority wasn't questioned. And I think, ooh, I'm actually glad that we're not in that time anymore because, as we can see, that's actually really dangerous. Because part of having the ability to do something needs to be tempered by taking influence from others. And I think, someone who is an authority figure who takes no influence from others, that's not a great authority figure to follow because I think we need as humans and we need to be able to learn from each other and whatever you're leading, whether you're leading a classroom or a workplace or a religious body, I think if you are not learning from the people that you are tasked to lead, then I don't see it being a successful thing. And so I I think living in uncertainty never feels good. There's a huge discomfort in not knowing where we're headed. There's risk because it could get worse, but there's also opportunity to say, you know what, we could learn from what we've been through and create something different, something better. Yeah,
That's not a natural tendency, though. Our natural tendency at times of uncertainty is to circle the wagons and
totally.
try to protect whatever we
Yeah,
can. And so it takes venturesome people to reach out beyond that. And not
yeah,
everybody has to reach out and get to know a Muslim or or a Sikh or a Hindu, but you can read about them. They're easy to find online. There's that kind of information is available. You know, how does what's happening in the world look through the eyes of someone who is not like
yeah,
me? And that
yeah,
and again, through my columns, I try to introduce people to those kinds of thinkings and thoughts.
yeah.
So my column on Saturday, this past Saturday, was about the what Christians call the Old Testament. Our premier was talking about the drug crisis in Manitoba, and he was asked how he was going to respond, and he said, "Well, it's going to be Old Testament for the drug dealers and New Testament for the drug users." And if you grew up
Mm,
Christian, you knew exactly what he meant. It's going to be harsh and punishing and rules and prison and everything Old Testament-ish for drug
yeah,
dealers, but we're going to be kind and gentle and merciful to drug users. And that's based
mm,
on a stereotype that Christians have imposed on the Old Testament. You
right.
know, we've come to see it that way through the eyes of our particular religion, but it's not the way the Jews see it. So I reached out to some
Mm.
Jews and asked them, "How do you see the Old Testament?
Ah,
Tell me." And of course,
oh,
they acknowledge that the Old Testament has accounts of divine punishment, but it's also a story about a God who desires
mm,
relationship, a covenant with his people, who also acts mercifully and forgives. Uh, so, you know, and then so just to say, and this is what the premier said, here's where that idea
I
comes
love it.
from. But hey, why don't you listen to a few Jews and see how they view their scriptures? And just be
Yeah,
reminded that these are their scriptures, by the way. And,
yeah,
you know, even though we refer them as old, it's
yeah,
theirs. It's called, they
yeah,
have a name for it. It's their Hebrew Bible. And just a
yeah,
gentle reminder that, you know, we don't have the hold on the truth or how these books are seen.
yeah,
So
yeah. So, are you publishing that on your Substack by chance?
no, it's in the newspaper. I, I have
Ah,
this amazing platform already, right? Where
you
everyone can
do?
read
What?
those. So
Okay,
yeah,
so would
but
people
yeah,
go to the Winnipeg Free Press
Winnipeg
to
Free
find
Press
that,
Faith
or
section. Yeah, if you go to the Faith
okay,
section, all the stories there are free. If you find my name, click on it, all my stories appear under my
okay.
name, and anyone can read those stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at our world today, is there something that gives you hope?
Yeah, just
Oh,
individuals, people doing
sorry.
their
I just want
best.
to. I just want to mention Chris's comment. He said, "I always found the dichotomy between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God hilarious. And to that point, I always held the position that Christians need to stop interpreting the Old Testament because it's not their book." So, he's agreeing with your
Mm,
assessment. Thanks,
there you
Chris.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
find
What do
hope.
you? What gives you hope?
Well, individuals, people just doing their little best as best they can to
Yeah.
to do something that enhances their neighborhood, looks after
Mm,
their neighbors, just doing stuff that if we can't fix the world, at least we can not add to its problems and burdens. You know, at a minimum. You
mhm,
know, just so
mhm,
that's what I is that big hope? I don't know if it's big hope or not.
yeah,
We're all just holding on for dear life right now, let's be honest, right? We don't know what
yeah,
Donald Trump's gonna tweet out in the next 10 minutes. We don't know what will happen in Iran or Ukraine or Israel or
mm,
Lebanon. We just hang on right now for dear life
mm,
more than anything else, and we need to hang on to each other. And that includes the others who are not only like us, but anyone
mm,
who's prepared or willing to go part of the way with us should be the same people that we view as our compatriots in this whole thing.
yeah. I read somewhere recently, and I wish I could give credit to the person who wrote it, but I read so much that I lose track. But it was think globally, act locally. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what you were saying. Like, how can I make a difference where I am in my
Hmm.
community, in my relationships, in my Substack, whatever that might look like. And I think, stories, we've touched on stories a couple of times. I think just that willingness to listen to other people's stories and learn from them, because I find so much broadening for me happens when I hear stories that are not like mine. Like, it's great to hear stories that are like mine because sometimes that helps me feel not so alone. Like, oh, I'm not the only one who deals with this. But there's also something really valuable about hearing how other people are experiencing the world, because sometimes it opens my eyes to inequalities, um, to challenges that I hadn't even thought about. But when I allow myself to think about them, it just, you're like, wow, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that is actually really significant. And yeah, I think a lot of times and this is one that I've struggled with over the last while, is when people get very adamant about and yes, we all have rights, and rights are also balanced by responsibility. And so that, do I love paying taxes? No, I don't want to pay taxes. But if my taxes help somebody else who has more struggles than I do, or who has less than I do, why would I not be willing to do that? And I think, those are just some examples of when you listen to stories, it can change your perspective. But yeah.
And what I would say, because I always want to put in a plug for the local media, wherever anyone is
Yeah.
living and listening to this, subscribe to your local newspaper or listen to your local
Mm,
radio station or whatever, because among other things, their job is to collect all those things, all those stories, and all those
mm,
perspectives in one place and deliver it to you once a day
mm,
or in a newscast. And if you live in Canada, go on the CBC website and read the stories there. You may not agree with them all, but they have presented you with a collection of stories that you're not going to find in the social media you are part of, because the algorithms will only send you things that you agree with or that you like
mm.
or that you follow.
Right.
So go and subscribe to something, and then you don't have to read every story, but check out the first few paragraphs of every story. See what everyone is saying. See what people say who are conservative, who are liberal, who are Republican, who are Democrat, who are Canadian, who are American, who are
Yeah,
British. Just that's a way to make sure that you aren't only getting one view of the world.
I agree. Like that, the importance of reading across a wide variety, and yeah, just being willing to listen to what other people see and say is really important. Chris has just mentioned that John Oliver did a piece on supporting your local news stations here that is worth
Mhm.
a watch.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly, because their job is to make sure that the communities they represent are represented in the paper.
yeah,
And yes, there are qualities about the media today that are legitimately worth criticizing, sure. But
yeah,
it's the one place where you're going to get a variety of perspectives that you won't get anywhere else. And that's important at
yeah,
a time when polarization and division is sort of how we describe our society more and more. Mm,
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's our goal. And if when as journalists, when we think about our work, the best compliment you can pay a journalist is that it was fair and balanced. That's all we strive for.
mm,
If it's well written and pleasurable to read, that's a bonus. But we want to make sure that
okay,
we represent people fairly, and that the
mm,
negative and the positive is both balanced in some way, so that you get
hmm,
the story. And it's never going to be the full story because the story is going to continue, but it's a starting point, a place to begin getting information that you might not get
yeah,
anywhere else. And if it makes your
yeah,
blood boil, that's important too. I mean, it might do
yeah.
that. If there's an injustice that you think should be addressed, maybe that's important to know as well.
Man, just it makes me think, like, why do we not have journalism courses as part of our school curriculum, because that honestly, you're raising something that I think every person should strive to do, to see the other person in a balanced way as the strengths and the challenges, the the good and the less desirable. Yeah.
Well, what I would add to that is that a few schools, I can only speak out of Manitoba, a few schools here in Manitoba have curriculum about religion, religious literacy. It's very, yeah,
Okay.
very few do, but that would be another way to address this. And religious literacy is not about evangelism. It's not about convincing anyone to believe one way or another. It's simply presenting the world to the students in a
Mm,
way that they understands, oh, so that's how Muslims view it, and oh, that's how Jews view it, and oh, that's how Hindus see the world. It's
mm,
a way of broadening it. And when I did a column on exactly that and talked to students, what did this mean to you? It was, well, it broadened my perspective. I now
oh,
understand better how people see the world. And you would think
yeah.
that religious literacy should be taught in every school. There should be in high school. Every curriculum should include some sort of mandatory, these are your neighbors. This is why they act the way they do.
Yeah.
This is why these women wear hijab. This is why
Right.
Jews, worship on Fridays and Saturdays. But whatever, so that you get a sense of people who are not like you. Or this is
Yeah.
why certain people don't believe at all. Atheism is also important to explore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I would advocate for that, but it's rare to find those courses taught anywhere. Journalism as a career is something that most young people today understand is not something they should be thinking about because the media is really on the ropes. But a
Mhm.
journalistic mindset is a good one to have.
For sure. Well, what what would you say to someone who says, I want to live life thoughtfully. I want to take more of what you've described here. What would you say? How would they do that?
To read widely, right? I mean,
Mm,
that's I've when I've asked people in the past what are your hobbies and they say reading, I often say reading's not a hobby. Reading's what you do to live. That's just normal. Hobbies are things to take you away from all of that. But yeah, obviously some people view reading as a hobby too. No, you read
yeah.
widely. Just don't read the stuff that makes you feel like yes, that's my view of the world too. But read
Mm,
books, read media. Just read is important. If you're halfway religious and you're so inclined, go to a mosque and visit it on Friday for prayers and just see. Go to a synagogue. And if you like eating, if you like free food, go to a gurdwara, go to a Sikh gurdwara. They have something called the langar. It's a deep, deep,
mm,
deep part of their religion, which
mm,
is based in equality of all people. They serve a free
mm.
meal and they typically meet Sunday mornings like Christians do. They serve a free meal after the service. And if you show up, you'll get
Wow.
a free meal. You have to sit cross-legged on the
Oh, that would
floor,
be
which is
good.
not like what I can do very easily, but yeah, so you can eat great food and meet people in your community who come from the Sikh tradition.
Mm,
So there's lots of different ways to just feed your mind in ways that
yeah.
are different to just learn, just develop a learning posture. I guess
Yeah.
that's the most important thing.
Awesome. Well, this has been just a really lovely conversation. And I guess I just have one question left for you, which
Sure.
is what question should I have asked you today?
Ah, gosh, that's a good question, and I don't know what you should have asked me today. But what I will say to you, because I have this comes up, people often ask me, what are the stories that left the biggest impact on you? And I often there's two.
Mm,
I have been privileged in my career to have interviewed Holocaust survivors, and that's something
mm,
that has moved me deeply. Probably a dozen or so, and there's very few left. I'm probably most of the ones I've interviewed have passed away by now, but their willingness to share from their most horrible of experiences in an effort to make sure it doesn't happen again, that's always been moving to
mm,
me. The other thing that I've been privileged to do is to interview residential school survivors, Indigenous residential school survivors here in Canada,
mm,
and to hear their stories and to And sometimes in some of those cases, to be the very first time they said them out loud to someone who was not
Mm,
Indigenous, but to a reporter, and to trust me to
mhm.
tell those stories of the abuse they experienced at church-run residential schools. That's been enormously an enormous privilege. And the last thing, through my work, I'm able to platform not only ideas but people, and so when I talk about indigenous people, it's a way to make them more visible. But I've also been privileged
Uh,
to tell the stories of many LGBTQ plus people and trans people, because they are a marginalized community as well, or have been,
yeah,
and
yeah,
just to present them as normal everyday people just doing normal everyday things is
yeah.
has been also something that's been important to me. So I grew up in a tradition where that was considered sin, where that was considered wrong, and I don't feel that way or believe that way anymore at all. And now I have this ability to be able to present these people to others and say, "Hey, just meet your neighbors. These are
Mm,
people just like
mhm.
you. They just have a different way of loving, and that's otherwise they're the same as you." And that's been an important thing for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, where you and I met was actually at a conversation of how can we build a more inclusive community and how do we, especially in church circles, create welcoming, loving, accepting space for people who are queer. And I mean, for me personally, I have some people in my life who are very close to me who are queer, and I love them deeply. They're just human, just like me. And so, yeah, yeah, thank you
Mm,
for sharing that.
you bet.
I get quotes every day by email, and the fun thing I find is that often the quote that I get on the morning of a live feels like it fits in really well. So today's was a quote by Saul Bellow: "Unexpected intrusions of beauty. This is what life is." And I thought, that first of all, I thought about you and I meeting and connecting. That was one of those moments of unexpected intrusions of beauty. But also, I find people's stories to me feel like those unexpected intrusions of beauty, even in the hard stories, because there's there's a connection that happens. There's a respect for what the other person brings to the table, uh, and then broadening. I love that you described for the high school students a sense of broadening, because I think that really is our hope and our goal is not that we narrow in and become more divisive, but that we broaden and that we see people in their fullness, not just as the caricature that they're painted to be. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here
Mhm.
today. This has been delightful, and I look forward to seeing just what you publish on Substack. And you know that I'm your number one fan and your biggest
Mhm.
supporter, and I will keep sharing your work because I really value your voice and what you bring to the table. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So you survived being on the other side of this. How was it?
Am I still live?
We're still live. Oh, you want to give me the unfiltered version? Okay.
Well, I
We are still live.
okay. When I talk to other journalists, I say that every now and then, once a year if they can, every journalist should be interviewed just to understand how
Mm,
naked and awful and vulnerable an
mm,
experience it is, because we're on the other end all the time asking the questions,
yeah,
and we never have to do feel that way. And so
yeah,
periodically we should be interviewed just so we understand what the other person is going through
yeah.
like this.
Love it. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and putting yourself in the hot seat
Mhm.
and for being here.
Thank
So,
you.
and thanks for those who joined. It was great. We
Perfect.
will see you next time. All right.